The night seemed endless on the isolated ranch in Wyoming. Cold winds howled through the cracks of the old wooden barn, making the scattered straw dance across the floorboards. In the dim light of a single swinging lantern, something extraordinary was unfolding. Lying in a soft bed of fresh hay, a newborn foal struggled to stand on his trembling legs. His reddish-brown coat clung wetly to his small body, and a perfect white star blazed on his forehead. Beside him, like a guardian sent by fate, sat Scout, a black and white Border Collie with watchful eyes and an enormous heart. Scout had stayed close through the entire birth, as if it were his solemn duty to protect this new life. From the moment the rescued wild mare went into labor, Scout had refused to leave her side. Now, with the mare too weak to care for her foal, Scout instinctively stepped into a role no one could have expected. With a tenderness that could break even the hardest heart, he gently licked the foal's tiny muzzle, urging him to breathe, to fight, to live. The foal, who would later be named Mustang, seemed to recognize something in Scout's gaze, a silent promise that as long as the dog drew breath, he would never be alone. The days that followed tested everyone on the ranch, but none more than Scout and Mustang. Without his mother, the foal relied on the humans, and most of all, on the devoted collie, to learn how to survive. Mustang learned to walk by following Scout's careful steps, stumbling but always getting back up. They shared the same old pink wool blanket during the cold nights, often found curled up together in the hay, a living portrait of loyalty and love that brought tears to the eyes of even the toughest ranch hands. As time passed, their bond deepened into something beyond words. Mustang grew stronger with each passing day, yet his heart beat to the rhythm of Scout's paws. To everyone on the ranch, especially Dolly Hayes and her husband Virgil, their connection was something rare, something pure. Scout and Mustang were inseparable. Where one went, the other followed. They were, it seemed, two halves of the same spirit. But life, relentless and unpredictable, was already shifting under their feet. As Mustang grew into a powerful young horse, an ancient pull began to stir deep within him. A call for freedom whispered through the open fields, growing louder with every sunset that painted the sky in golden fire. Then, one warm afternoon, Mustang galloped beyond the ranch fences, past the hills, into the wild unknown, leaving Scout standing alone by the fence line. Scout watched the horizon long after Mustang disappeared, his loyal eyes full of longing and quiet hope. Little did he know, years later, Mustang would return, bringing something that no one, not even faithful Scout, could have ever imagined. The ranch felt hollow without Mustang's presence. Mornings once filled with the rhythmic clatter of small hooves now echoed with an eerie stillness. Scout would trot to the pasture gate every dawn, his ears perked and tail wagging in hopeful anticipation. But each day ended the same, with him lying quietly by the worn fence post, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a silhouette that never appeared. Dolly Hayes, watching from the porch with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, often wiped away a tear. It broke her heart to see Scout's unwavering loyalty met with silence. Virgil tried to comfort the old dog, patting his head and whistling for him to come inside, but Scout would only return reluctantly, his gaze always drifting back toward the open fields. Even Dusty, the gentle old gelding, seemed to miss Mustang's youthful energy. The entire ranch felt heavier, as if a vital piece of it had been ripped away. Nights grew longer, and even the lively warmth of the fireplace couldn't fill the empty spaces Mustang had left behind. As months turned into years, life on the ranch shifted into a quiet, steady rhythm. Dolly and Virgil focused on repairs and tending the land, trying not to speak of the young foal that had vanished so suddenly. Amos Whitaker, their neighbor and lifelong friend, often stopped by with supplies and news from town. He would sit on the porch with Virgil, exchanging few words, but every now and then they'd share a heavy glance, both knowing that some wounds time simply couldn't heal. Josie Whitaker, now a spirited young woman, often came to help on weekends, bringing with her a breath of fresh air and unspoken hope. She would spend hours brushing Dusty's coat and whispering softly to Scout, promising that one day Mustang would return. Scout listened, his ears twitching at her voice, but his faith never wavered. He waited, through the scorching summers and the bitter Wyoming winters, always at the same spot by the fence, his spirit anchored by a bond that neither distance nor time could sever. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills and bathed the fields in a fiery glow, a strange sound broke the familiar silence. Scout's ears snapped up, his body rigid. Dolly, sitting on the porch with Virgil and Josie, noticed the sudden change. It wasn't just Scout's reaction. Dusty lifted his head too, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent carried by the wind. Something, or someone, was approaching, something that stirred an ancient memory deep inside them all. Scout bolted toward the gate, barking sharply into the gathering dusk. Virgil rose from his chair, heart hammering against his ribs. Dolly gripped Josie's hand tightly, unable to tear her eyes from the horizon. A shadow was emerging from the fading light, larger, stronger, and moving with a determination that sent shivers through the still air. They didn't know it yet, but the moment they had prayed for, and the truth they could never have expected, was finally galloping home. The figure moving through the dusk grew clearer with each pounding heartbeat. Mustang's powerful body, once lean and coltish, now rippled with muscle under a thick, gleaming coat. His mane flowed wild in the evening breeze, and his gait was strong, purposeful. But what truly stole the breath from Dolly's lips and made Scout bark with both joy and confusion was not Mustang alone. Beside him, almost hidden by his towering presence, was another figure, a foal. Small, trembling, and painfully thin, struggling to keep pace with the mighty Mustang. Virgil stepped forward instinctively, his boots crunching on the dry earth. Mustang slowed as he neared the gate, his eyes never leaving Scout's. For a long, suspended moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Scout whined softly, then pushed the gate open with his nose, inviting Mustang back into the only home he had ever known. Mustang hesitated, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, a silent question that flickered in his dark, intelligent eyes. Would they accept not just him, but the fragile life he now protected? Dolly rushed forward with tears streaming down her face, Josie close behind her. As they reached Mustang, they saw the full extent of the little one's condition. The foal's ribs were visible beneath a dull gray coat, and old scars marred its legs. Mustang stepped slightly aside, nudging the foal toward them with a gentle nudge of his muzzle, as if presenting a sacred trust. No one needed words to understand what had happened. Somewhere out there in the wild, Mustang had found another lost soul, and just like Scout had once done for him, Mustang had become a guardian. Over the following minutes, they worked together with careful urgency. Dr. Calvin Brooks was summoned from town. Josie prepared a warm stall. Scout refused to leave Mustang's side, pressing his body close in silent solidarity. As Dolly wrapped the small foal in warm blankets and offered it water from a bucket, Mustang stayed watchful, his muscles tense, ready to defend his new companion if needed. But he didn't need to. Love and understanding poured from every corner of that old ranch house, wrapping Mustang and the fragile foal in a blanket of acceptance. That night, the ranch came alive again. For the first time in years, laughter and soft conversation filled the kitchen. Josie named the little one Ember, for the way hope still glowed in his tired eyes. Outside, Mustang stood near the barn, looking up at the endless stars. Scout sat beside him, both of them silent but deeply connected, two protectors bound by the invisible threads of loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional love. But even as the warmth of reunion filled the ranch, an uneasy question settled in Virgil's mind. Where had Mustang been all these years? And what dangers had he faced, or perhaps brought back, with him? The answer to that would soon unfold, changing everything they thought they knew about Mustang's incredible journey. The next morning, the ranch buzzed with cautious hope. The air smelled of fresh hay and warm bread, but a subtle undercurrent of unease lingered. Ember, still weak but spirited, clung to Mustang's side like a shadow. Dolly and Josie tended to the foal with tenderness, while Scout stayed near, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble. Mustang remained vigilant, restless in a way that no one had ever seen before. It was as if he carried invisible scars, not on his body, but deep within his soul. Virgil couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After breakfast, he saddled Dusty and rode out toward the hills where Mustang had appeared the evening before. He hoped to find simple answers, maybe the remnants of a wild herd, maybe signs of where Mustang had been. Instead, what he found unsettled him. Far beyond the ranch boundaries, near a dry creek bed, Virgil discovered a series of strange markings on the ground. Heavy hoofprints mixed with something else. Tracks too deep, too erratic, almost as if something had been dragged. Later that afternoon, he gathered Dolly, Josie, and Amos on the porch to discuss what he had seen. "I don't like it," Virgil said, his voice low and grim. "Something chased them here." Dolly clutched the edge of her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The idea that Mustang, their Mustang, had fled through unknown dangers to bring a broken foal home sent a ripple of fear through them all. Josie sat silent, her mind racing with questions she couldn't even begin to form aloud. Inside the barn, Mustang paced near Ember, occasionally lifting his head to snort at the open doors. Scout sat in front of him, ears alert, tail stiff, sensing the heavy tension hanging in the air. Mustang had survived the wilds, but survival often came at a cost. Whatever haunted him hadn't stayed behind. It clung to him like dust in the creases of a worn saddle. And deep down, Scout knew, danger wasn't finished with them yet. That night, after the chores were done and the stars blanketed the sky, Dolly found herself unable to sleep. She stood by the window, watching the barn bathed in moonlight. In the distance, a faint sound carried on the wind, a low, guttural call that didn't belong to any creature she knew. Her heart pounded as she turned away, pretending she hadn't heard it, but deep inside, fear bloomed like a dark flower. Whatever had driven Mustang back to them, it wasn't far behind. Meanwhile, Mustang stood guard over Ember, his powerful body tense, his gaze locked on the darkness beyond the ranch fences. Scout lay at his feet, every muscle ready to spring. Together, they waited, protectors once again, for the storm they both sensed was coming. The first sign of trouble came just before midnight. Scout, who had been dozing lightly in the barn beside Mustang and Ember, snapped awake with a sharp bark. Mustang lifted his head instantly, ears pricked, muscles coiled tight. Outside, the cool Wyoming night hung heavy with a stillness that felt wrong. Too quiet, too thick, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Scout bolted from the barn, his bark growing louder, sharper, slicing through the darkness like an alarm. Dolly and Virgil were already awake, jolted from their restless sleep by Scout's warnings. Virgil grabbed his rifle from the corner, more for comfort than out of any real expectation he would need it. Dolly rushed to Josie's room, finding her already at the window, pale and wide-eyed. "Grandpa," Josie whispered, "something's out there." Virgil didn't hesitate. He moved out onto the porch, every step heavy with dread, the old wood creaking under his boots. At the edge of the property, near the north fence line, shadows moved. They weren't cattle, and they weren't coyotes. They were larger, slower, deliberate. Mustang charged from the barn with a furious whinny, placing himself between the approaching figures and the barn doors. Ember stumbled after him, too frightened to understand but unwilling to be left behind. Scout stood firm, fur bristling, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Virgil peered into the darkness, heart pounding against his ribs, and caught a glimpse of them. Feral horses, wild and broken, their eyes gleaming with something almost unnatural. These weren't just Mustangs from the hills. They were different. Their bodies were scarred, their movements wrong, almost mechanical. And among them, staggering with a limp, was a monstrous stallion, far larger than Mustang, his coat torn and matted, his breath coming out in ragged huffs. This was the thing that had chased Mustang home, and it hadn't come alone. It had brought a pack of followers, wild and desperate, and now they stood at the ranch's edge, watching, waiting. For a moment, the world seemed frozen. Mustang planted his hooves firmly in the dirt, his body trembling with rage and fear. Scout snarled, ready to defend his family at any cost. Dolly and Josie stood behind Virgil, clutching each other's hands tightly. The barn lights flickered in the distance, casting long, eerie shadows across the field. Every instinct told them to run, to hide, but there was nowhere left to go. Their home, their sanctuary, was under siege. And then, with a deafening scream, the monstrous stallion charged the fence. The fence splintered under the massive stallion's weight, the sharp crack echoing across the ranch like a gunshot. Mustang lunged forward with a furious neigh, meeting the beast head-on. Dust erupted around them as the two horses clashed, their bodies colliding with bone-jarring force. Mustang, smaller but faster, dodged a brutal kick and countered with a powerful shove to the larger stallion's shoulder. Scout darted in and out, snapping at the flanks of the invading herd, driving them back inch by inch. Virgil fired a warning shot into the air, the sharp report momentarily stunning the wild horses. But it was clear, these animals were beyond fear, beyond reason. They had been driven mad by something out there, something no man could undo with a rifle or a fence. Dolly and Josie scrambled to usher Ember into the barn, wrapping him tightly in blankets to shield him from the chaos. The young foal whinnied in terror, but Mustang's fierce gaze never wavered from his enemies. This was his home. He would not lose it. The monstrous stallion reared up, hooves slashing at the air, and lunged again at Mustang. This time, the force of the attack sent Mustang skidding backward into the mud. Scout immediately leapt at the bigger stallion's legs, biting and snarling with feral desperation. Mustang struggled to his feet, his flanks heaving, blood seeping from a shallow cut along his side. For a heartbeat, everything slowed, the stars spinning overhead, the earth trembling underfoot, and then Mustang charged once more, not with fear, but with a thunderous cry of defiance. Inside the barn, Josie pressed her hands to the window, tears streaming down her face. "Come on, Mustang," she whispered. "You're stronger than he is." Dolly knelt beside Ember, stroking the foal's trembling body, whispering prayers she hadn't uttered in years. Outside, Virgil kept his rifle trained on the herd, ready to act if Mustang faltered. But deep down, he knew this was Mustang's fight. The bond between Scout and Mustang had shaped him into a warrior, not just a survivor. With a final, brutal collision, Mustang slammed his body into the monstrous stallion's chest. The bigger horse staggered, his legs buckling under the force of the blow. Scout barked furiously, driving the remaining wild horses back into confusion. Sensing the shift, Mustang reared up, letting out a sound that was part roar, part war cry. The invaders broke. One by one, they turned and fled into the darkness, their leader stumbling after them, beaten but not entirely broken. The ranch fell into a stunned silence, broken only by Mustang's heavy breathing and Scout's low growl fading into a whimper. They had won, for now. But as Virgil lowered his rifle and Dolly rushed to Mustang's side, a heavy truth settled over them all. Whatever darkness had touched those wild horses, it wasn't finished yet. It had found them once, and it could find them again. Morning broke over the ranch in a haze of gold and gray, the sun struggling to pierce the heavy mist clinging to the ground. The battered fence was a harsh reminder of the night's battle, its jagged edges jutting out like broken bones against the soft light. Mustang stood near the barn, head bowed but unbroken, his side streaked with drying blood. Scout rested at his feet, too exhausted to move but unwilling to leave his friend's side. From the porch, Dolly, Virgil, and Josie watched silently, hearts heavy with a mix of relief and dread. Dr. Calvin Brooks arrived by mid-morning, his old pickup kicking up a trail of dust down the long drive. He worked quickly, cleaning Mustang's wounds and checking Ember, whose body still trembled with fear. As he packed away his supplies, Calvin's face turned grave. "That herd that came through here," he said, voice low, "they weren't just wild. They were wrong. I've seen feral horses before, but nothing like that. It's almost like something poisoned their minds." His words hung in the air, thick and unsettling. Later that afternoon, as Dolly repaired the broken fence and Josie tended to Ember, Virgil and Amos rode out together to survey the land. They found more signs that chilled them to the bone. Deep scars on the trees, patches of earth gouged as if by frantic hooves, and in one clearing, a strange blackened circle where nothing grew. Amos, usually a man of few words, shook his head grimly. "This ain't natural, Virgil. Something's out there, something bad." They rode back in silence, the land around them feeling less like home and more like a warning. Back at the ranch, Mustang grew increasingly restless. He paced the edges of the paddock, snorting and pawing at the ground, his instincts screaming of unseen threats. Scout shadowed him, equally unsettled, barking at shadows and sniffing the air with tense urgency. Even Dusty, the old gelding who had seen decades of seasons come and go, stayed close to the barn, refusing to venture out into the open fields. It was as if the very earth remembered the terror that had passed through, and braced itself for its return. That night, as the family sat around the kitchen table, maps and old books spread out before them, Dolly found an entry in an ancient journal once kept by her grandfather. It spoke of the Black Herd, a group of horses driven mad by starvation, isolation, and some unknown sickness during a brutal winter decades ago. They had vanished into legend. But now it seemed they had returned, and Mustang's fight was only the beginning. Outside, beneath the cold gaze of 1,000 stars, Mustang lifted his head and let out a soft, haunting whinny, a sound filled not with fear, but with a warning. Whatever had scarred the Black Herd once had not been defeated, and it was coming back for them all. The following days were filled with an uneasy silence. Every sunrise brought a sense of urgency, every sunset a tightening knot of fear. Mustang remained restless, circling the ranch as if patrolling a fortress. Scout stayed close, never letting Mustang or Ember out of his sight. Even the wind seemed different now, colder, sharper, carrying with it the scent of something wrong. The land itself, once vibrant and comforting, felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for whatever was coming. Virgil and Amos reinforced the fences, working side by side without speaking much. They both knew it was a temporary measure at best. If the Black Herd returned in full force, no wooden barrier would stop them. Dolly kept the house warm and the barn stocked with supplies, while Josie pored over the old journals late into the night, searching desperately for anything that might explain how to survive what was coming. Fear hung over the ranch like an invisible fog, seeping into their bones. Late one evening, as the last light drained from the sky, Ember began to cry out, sharp, panicked whinnies that echoed through the barn. Mustang bolted to his side immediately, nostrils flaring. Scout barked wildly, racing to the open door. When Virgil and Dolly rushed outside, they saw them, dark shapes gathering just beyond the tree line, their eyes gleaming like embers in the dying light. The Black Herd had returned, larger and more menacing than before, their leader, the monstrous stallion, now flanked by even more broken, wild horses. Virgil's instincts kicked in. "We can't defend the ranch against that," he said grimly. "We need to move them now." Dolly nodded without hesitation, grabbing a rope and a few supplies. Josie threw Ember's blanket over his back, whispering soothing words to keep him calm. Mustang stood tall and fierce, his body a shield for the frail foal. Scout barked at their heels, urging them to move faster. Every second counted. The herd at the tree line shifted, beginning to spread out, trying to encircle the ranch like a tightening noose. The plan was desperate. Lead Mustang, Ember, and Dusty through the backfields toward the river, using the thick woods for cover. It wasn't a perfect plan, but staying meant certain defeat. Dolly's heart ached to leave their home, even temporarily, but there was no choice. Family, in whatever form it came, had to come first. Scout took the lead, Mustang following with Ember at his side, and the humans close behind, moving quickly but quietly into the thickening darkness. As they disappeared into the trees, the first shrill cries of the black herd pierced the night, a sound so chilling it seemed to freeze the very blood in their veins. The chase had begun, and survival was no longer just a hope, it was a race against time. The night swallowed them whole as they pushed deeper into the woods. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots snagged their boots, and every sound, every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent adrenaline surging through their veins. Scout led the way with fierce determination, weaving a path through the dark, while Mustang stayed close to Ember, nudging the frightened foal forward with gentle, urgent pushes. Behind them, Dolly, Virgil, and Josie moved as quickly as they dared, hearts pounding, lungs burning. But the black herd was relentless. Their cries grew louder, more frenzied, cutting through the night like knives. Mustang stopped suddenly, ears pinned back, body rigid. Through the trees, Virgil saw them, dark shapes threading between the trunks, closing in fast. "We're not going to outrun them," Virgil gasped. Dolly's face was pale but set with fierce resolve. Josie clutched Ember's lead rope tighter, tears welling in her eyes. They all knew, if they were caught here, there would be no escape. Mustang moved first. With a sharp whinny, he turned, putting himself between his family and the advancing herd. Scout growled low and stood beside him, ready to defend until the last breath. It wasn't a plan. It was instinct, pure and unbreakable. Mustang would not run. He would not abandon the ones who had given him a home. Dolly grabbed Virgil's arm, pulling him back toward a cluster of thick trees. "We can't help him if we're dead," she whispered fiercely. Tears spilled down Josie's cheeks as she was dragged to safety, her heart breaking with every step. In the clearing, Mustang pawed the ground furiously, challenging the black herd with a wild, defiant scream. The monstrous stallion leading them reared up, his massive form silhouetted against the thin sliver of moonlight. The two locked eyes across the clearing, old rage and new courage burning between them. With a burst of speed, the black stallion charged, and Mustang met him head-on, teeth bared, muscles straining, refusing to yield an inch. Scout darted around the edges, snapping at the legs of any horse that tried to circle Mustang. The battle was savage and chaotic, a blur of hooves, teeth, and blood under the cold stars. Virgil, hidden among the trees, raised his rifle but lowered it again, realizing this fight was Mustang's alone. Ember pressed trembling against Dolly's side, too terrified even to cry. Josie covered her mouth, praying silently, helpless to do anything but watch. And then, with a move so quick it seemed impossible, Mustang twisted his body and slammed into the black stallion's flank with every ounce of strength he possessed. A sickening thud echoed through the woods as the leader stumbled, legs buckling, crashing to the ground. For a heartbeat, everything froze, and then the black herd broke apart in confusion, their strength shattered, their will finally broken. But Mustang didn't celebrate. He stood trembling, bleeding, staring down at the fallen stallion, knowing the cost of victory was not yet fully paid. The woods fell into an eerie, sacred silence. The black herd had vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only broken branches and deep scars in the earth. Mustang stood in the center of the clearing, his body battered, his breathing ragged, but his spirit unbroken. Scout limped to his side, pressing against him with quiet loyalty. In that moment, under the faint silver light of the moon, it was clear they had won. Not with strength alone, but with something far more powerful: heart. Dolly ran to Mustang first, her hands trembling as she touched his blood-streaked coat. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her smile broke through, radiant with pride. "You're home," she whispered. Virgil and Josie followed quickly, kneeling beside Scout, inspecting his wounds with tender care. Josie hugged him tightly, burying her face in his fur. They had all survived, scarred, changed, but together. Ember, sensing the shift in the air, let out a soft, uncertain whinny. Mustang immediately turned to him, nuzzling the little foal gently, reassuring him that the nightmare was over. Slowly, they made their way back toward the ranch. The walk felt endless, each step heavy with exhaustion, but there was hope in every movement. As they approached the battered old house, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the fields in soft gold. It was a new day, and somehow they had earned it. The fences would be rebuilt. The scars would fade. But the bond they shared now, the bond born in fire and fear, would never break. In the days that followed, life returned to the ranch. Mustang healed, his body regaining its strength, his spirit more vibrant than ever. Scout, though limping slightly from his injuries, never left Mustang's side. Ember thrived under their care, growing stronger, braver with each passing day. Dolly often sat on the porch, watching them graze together, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. Virgil repaired the fences with Amos, laughing more easily now, the shadows finally lifting from his eyes. Josie, sitting beside Ember one afternoon, whispered, "You're safe because someone loved you enough to fight." And as Mustang lifted his head proudly, Scout at his side, it was clear the fight had been worth it. They had faced the darkness together and found their way back to the light. They were home. And this time, nothing would ever tear them apart again.